Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. Before we get started, just a question I want you to be thinking about, kind of mulling over, that we'll come back to later. And the question is this: what are the inputs? What are the various ways that you determine what's true? Like, what is the foundation of reality? I'm not talking about in some existential, sense, or in terms of like, metaphysical things kind of out in the ether, but just, how do you determine, what's true about coronavirus, or what's true about the economy or race relations, anything like that? Like, what are the inputs that are the foundations of your reality or perceptions of reality? We'll come back to that here in a minute. So what prompted me to want to make this video is yesterday was one of these days. They don't happen very often. They happen more often than you would think, but either way, they're kind of fun when it happens. And it's a day where I end up in disagreements with people on both the left and the right over, left-leaning things and over right-leaning things. And in different social media interactions around the same time, I get accused of being the other one. So I get in a disagreement or just say something, and someone on the left will say that I am, some far right Republican type thing. And then in other interactions, I'm with someone on the right, I might say something or have a disagreement or something, and they accuse me of being some far left, spoiled snowflake kind of thing. And it's like you almost always want to copy and paste and show it. It's like, well, this person is saying I'm on your team and you're saying I'm on their team, so maybe you're both morons. I don't know, just throwing it out there. But anyway, yesterday was one of those days that was happening, and I'll get into kind of some of those interactions here in a minute. But I had that happen, and I also was listening to a conservative talk about how the media were gaslighting us, and we're being gaslit. And I've heard that before from conservatives, but I'd also just read an article on Huffington Post, because I really try to get perspectives from both the far left and the right, and as much as I can to form my opinions of things, that was literally called the gaslighting president. And it was the Huffington Post talking about how the president was gaslighting us with his State of the Union speech. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. So I have a conservative talking about how they're being gaslit by the media, and they were saying some things that I agree with. And we have this Huffington Post thing saying that, no, we're being gaslit by the right. No, the left isn't doing it. The right is gaslighting us. The president is gaslighting us in this way. And I didn't agree with everything they're saying, but I kind of understood their perspective on it. And I'm like, okay, both these sides believe this in all earnesty. And later I have someone on the left, who fervently believes that I must be some far right Republican, right winger. And they believe that sincerely. And then I have someone on the right who sincerely believes I must be some leftist, some radical, they kept calling me like a spoiled leftist. I'm like, oh my gosh. Anyway, and they believe that. I'm like, okay, these are two fundamentally different assessments of the same situation. In one situation, you have people assessing their perception of me, and they land on wildly different conclusions. And then in another, you have two different perspectives of just current events and the state of things. And both sides land on, no, you're gaslighting me. And they believe that in earnestness. And so I'm like, okay, what leads to this? How does this happen? And I know I've talked about gaslighting a little bit in just putting forward my theory that I think that there is one portion of society that is functioning as an emotional abuser towards the rest of society. And within that group, that's why I call them functional abusers, there is a majority of that group that doesn't realize they're doing it. And gaslighting is one of those tactics that causes that, what I call it's an atmosphere of abuse I think a lot of people are experiencing right now. And I have 2 videos on that, and I'm going to be making more that I'll put some links to that you can click and check that out. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is how someone could have the perception that they're being gaslit without it being necessarily some malicious thing. And so, gaslighting, it comes from this old movie from 1938. And, if you don't know what it means, it's basically where someone is intentionally challenging your perceptions of reality. So this husband keeps turning the light down on, or the lamps down on his wife, and he's trying to get his wife to go crazy and potentially kill herself. And so she is having, every part of her being is screaming, this is true. It is dimmer in here. What is going on? And he's confidently saying, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, it doesn't seem dimmer in here to me. And so gaslighting on, if you were to strip the malicious intent out of it, which is what he was doing there. And it's the reason I use this website. This is the National Domestic Violence Hotline website. Where someone might say, are you sure, you're crazy, it never happened, it's all in your head. If you strip the malicious intent, it's just someone challenging your perception of reality with something that seems completely false and incompatible with what you believe to be true about reality. And what I would say here is that, or at least I'm going to ask the question, is it possible for that to happen without the malicious intent? In other words, can accidental gaslighting happen? I do believe there is a malicious thing happening, and I think the people doing it maliciously are influencing others to do it accidentally, and it's forwarding this atmosphere of abuse. That's not what I'm talking about. Is it possible for both the left and the right to collectively believe they're being gaslit by the other side and it not necessarily be anything that has to do with malicious intent? And what are the circumstances that would lead to that belief? And so let's first define some terms here. All right. The first term is reality, is what is true to you. And the thing that I would point out is that reality, there is empirical reality, right? So fire is hot, the terminal velocity of this thing is this, how far is this city from this city, all these things that we can measure empirically. Those are real, regardless of, how much we engage with them being true, right? The boiling point of water is 212 degrees, right? I think it's 212. Anyway, but there could also be perceptions of reality, right? That aren't necessarily something that is always going to just come up as a matter of something that's empirically observable or something like that. So an example would be an atheist has a perception of reality that's fundamentally different and incompatible with that of a Christian. And so an atheist has a lens based on their belief or lack thereof that will impact just how they operate and navigate the world. It'll be different than how a Christian does. But those two things aren't necessarily going to always butt up against each other, right? In other words, an atheist and a Christian could both be, co-owners of like an ice cream store. And as long as they were both conducting themselves ethically, those two beliefs aren't necessarily going to butt up against each other. But what happens if they had, their differences in their beliefs about reality compounded to the point where they're constantly butting up against each other? Well, how do you resolve that? And that's what I'm saying is, I think that it's possible that's happening right here. So the first thing is reality and our perceptions of reality. The other thing would be, and maybe this isn't a definition, but just something to think about, is what forms that? What forms that view of reality? And I would argue that one of the things that contributes to that is our media intake. And that's why I have this stupid picture drawn back here for those of you watching, and I'll get into that here in a minute. But before we get to that, I want to play a clip. I know I've played clips from this book before, Matt Taibbi's book, Hate Incorporated. And in this clip, he's describing the way in which different news media outlets silo off their viewers and only feed them what they want to hear. And he also kind of gets to the consequences of that. All right, so this is kind of the second component here. So there's what is empirically true about reality, and then there's kind of our perceptions of what's true. And, the degree in which that belief or that perception, is incorporated into our everyday life is going to impact how much that belief clashes with someone who has a different belief. But let's listen to this clip really fast here first.
By the summer of 2016, I predicted the press would soon be divided in a way that left media audiences permanently sheltered from any narratives their side might find troublesome. If you're a consumer of one media brand, the polls will tell you Trump is trending up. He's 5 points ahead at the beginning of 2018. Pick another brand and you'll learn only 38% of Americans plan to vote for him, and he's in dire trouble. You can tell yourself any story you want about the future. During the heat of the Russiagate panic, if you chose one brand, you'd read often about the beginning of the end of the Trump presidency. Pick another and you'd read there are basically no legal avenues for removing Trump prematurely that don't involve a Republican Senate's unexpected cooperation. I work in this business and don't know who to trust. The situation recalls the landscape of third world countries, where the truth has to be pieced together from disparate bits reported by news outlets loyal to different oligarchical factions. Companies are nurturing emotional dependencies for cash. The key is to always report negatively about the other audience, but never about your own.
We'll pause it there. There's more worth listening to in that clip, but that's the main crux of it. So what Taibbi is saying there is there's a couple levels of understanding about, well, let's talk about what he's saying and then I'll give my thoughts on it. What he's saying is that the media, news media, and kind of part of the thesis of the book is that this maybe happened in the post-Cold War era, is that they are only trying to speak to one audience and just confirm their biases all day long. And in another video I made talking about this book, I play another clip where he says they're just profiting off of getting us addicted to hating each other. And he kind of hints at it there where he says one of the ways in which you do this is you never say anything bad about your side. You only say things bad about the other side. So if I'm on the left, I'll only hear criticisms of the right. And if I'm on the right, I'll only hear criticisms of the left. And so, but he's saying as a journalist, because Matt Taibbi, he wrote for Rolling Stone, he's been a journalist for a long time. And he's saying, as a journalist, I work in this business and I don't know what to believe. I have to piece this together because there's no one source that I see as fundamentally trustworthy. And my point is that, we all know that there's this idea of echo chambers and having our bias confirmed and so on and so forth. And there are certainly levels in which having your bias confirmed about things can be more, I guess, the word coming to my mind is mundane, but that's not really what I'm thinking of, where it's just less of a big deal. It has less of an impact than others. So think of an example of, let's say I preferred Ford trucks over Chevys or something like that. And I only sought out information about vehicles that confirmed that bias. Is that really a big deal for my life? No, not really. I mean, it does have some consequences, but if I only buy Ford vehicles, is it going to have such a monumentally difference in my life compared to if I bought, a myriad of different vehicle brands? Well, probably not. So that's one level of having your bias confirmed. But another one would be like, okay, what if you're like a super racist person and you harbored ridiculous racist beliefs about another race or another group of people or something. And you only sought out things that confirm that bias. Well, that's a much more insidious bias to have confirmed, right? So my point is that depending on what the belief is, having that confirmed has different consequences for your life, and consequences for those you interact with. And the other thing I kind of want to, I guess, maybe elucidate a little bit, peel another layer back on, is another way of saying your biases are confirmed, or you're in an echo chamber, or you're only listening to people who share your own opinions about stuff, is another way of saying that is, well, what are your biases? Well, your biases are your beliefs, right? And what is the sum total if you take all of your beliefs, all of your opinions, all of your views on stuff, all of your perceptions? Well, what does that make? That makes your reality. That makes your reality. And that's why I asked the question at the beginning, what shapes your view of reality? There are certainly things on an empirical level that shape your view of reality. Like, you don't need to be reminded every single day that gravity exists, right? Like, it's just so self-evident that you just engage with reality with the understanding that gravity exists, right? You don't need to constantly check up on that truth. But there are certainly ways in which that you can have a reality perception that is fostered over time that can become just as true for you in your life, that can become just as natural as your interaction with the reality of gravity, right? And so that's kind of my point, is that, I think that one of the consequences of what Taibbi is describing here, of people just only getting their biases confirmed, is that another way of saying that is that they are cultivating a perception of reality that's going to end up being radically different than someone who's on the other side of that equation, right? And the data bears that out. So here's a few things we're going to look at. We're going to shotgun through these articles here, and then we'll kind of wrap it up because I'm not wanting this to be too long of a video. But this is from Pew Research. I'll include all these sources, as I always do. So this one's from July 30th, not that long ago. Americans who mainly get their news on social media are less engaged and less knowledgeable, which is, the less knowledgeable particularly should be pretty self-evident. But here's the crazy part, is that if you scroll down here, it says about 1 in 5 adults say they get their political news primarily through social media. So that's 18% of people who primarily get it through social media, which means they're probably getting it from an echo chamber, right? Like your social media it's groomed, it's cultivated, it's usually going to be an echo chamber, all right? And then you have about, down here it looks like 25% from a news website or app, and then another 13% from network TV. And there could be some overlap there, right? So CNN has a website and an app. They're also on TV. And so, or ABC, NBC, MSNBC, whatever, Fox News, etc. You get what I'm saying? And so the point is that people, there could be some overlap between there, but you have 20% of the or 18% of the population primarily getting their news from an echo chamber. What's that going to cause? Well, that's going to cultivate a view of reality. Okay, let's go over here. About 1/5 of Democrats and Republicans get political news in a kind of media bubble. So this is this group is going to end up being different than the one over here, all right? Because this is only talking about media sources, like official media sources. So you have 20% of Democrats are in a left-leaning audience news bubble, and 18% of Republicans are in a right-leaning audience news bubble. And what they give here are things like Fox News, NPR, New York Times, CNN, NBC, and et cetera. They're not talking about social media. So here's what's I think is kind of fascinating. So if you're to take, the entire population, and let's say you have this percentage that's Democrat and this percentage that's Republican. Of that group, of those respective groups, you have 18% that are in one bubble, 20% in another bubble, and then we also have another 18% that's in a social media bubble. So you put all that together, and that's like 56% of the country that are getting their information primarily from an echo chamber, right? Now think about what Taibbi said. This is radically different. If you're getting it from this source, it's going to be so different from what you would get from this other source. You don't know what to believe because they are so disparate. Like the chasm between this worldview and this worldview is enormous. And these Pew Research things are showing that we have about 56% of these people, are over half at least, are in some kind of bubble that's creating a different view of reality. One thing I thought was interesting here is you have right here, what is this, 38% that are in a bubble from their main network TVs, or from their main network cable, right? And then we have, or not main network cable, but from the media apparatus they're consuming from, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, whatever. And then if you add news website or app plus network TV, you get 38%. I'm not saying it's the same, because some of that, could be cable, and so on and so forth. But the point is that over half of the people who are going to be, another thing to think about, I just thought of this, but is that this is going to be people that are the politically activated, right? Like if you're looking for your political news, you're probably someone who's engaged in it on some level, or at least think you are, or want to be informed or want to be engaged. And it's the same with the people who are getting their political stuff from social media primarily. So anyway, if over half of the people who are engaged in the political process and in these conversations are existing in some kind of echo chamber, well, that's a pretty big problem. It's a pretty big problem. And we know that over half of people don't feel comfortable sharing their views and just self-censor anyway. So my guess is the only ones having the conversations are the loud people who just exist in an echo chamber. Anyway, here's another thing. So we have partisanship in America's main news sources for politics. And so if you look at the relationship here, if you're on the right, you primarily get your stuff from Fox News. If you're on the left, you primarily get your stuff from MSNBC, right? Does that make sense? So that's if you are, if you identify as blank, this is your main news source here and what you find to be trustworthy. And then you see kind of an inverse relationship right here. All right. Again, that's cultivating wildly different perspectives of reality. Here we go. Partisan. This is from the impeachment. I think this is a Pew. I think this was also Pew Research. Yeah. So your view on the impeachment stuff was going to be different depending on what media you're intaking, right? So if you're only getting media from a right-leaning, if you leaned right and you're only getting it from right-leaning sources, then your view of why Donald Trump withheld aid to Ukraine is going to be overwhelmingly because you thought he was trying to advance a government position. If you're on the left and you only get your news sources from left-leaning audiences or from left-leaning outlets, you're overwhelmingly going to believe the exact opposite. So another way of saying that is that your view of what is true in this situation is radically different depending on your media diet, right? Your media diet. Here we go. Here's another one, Pew Research again. Democrats express more trust or trust of more news sources than Republicans. You see it's about the exact opposite, right? So we have Republicans distrust more than 20 sources and Democrats trust more than distrust 22 sources. Now, what I would say is that how many mainstream media sources are lean left versus lean right? Well, there's way more that lean left. So of course, Democrats are going to trust more sources because they have more sources they will find to be trustworthy because they are doing, what did Taibbi say? Confirming their biases, telling them, what they want to hear and, getting them addicted to hating the other side. So why would you not distrust something? Why would you not? What's another way of saying I don't trust you? Saying I don't believe what you're saying is true. In other words, your picture of reality is different than mine, or you're trying to convince me of something about reality that I know isn't true. Gaslighting. I believe I'm being gaslit. Here's the last one. So we have Americans led by Republicans have different belief about, they believe that the COVID-19 outbreak is overblown and their level of attention on COVID news has dropped. Now, I would say there's probably a few different reasons for that. One of them is that if you live in a major metropolitan area, you're more likely to be Democrat than Republican. Where has COVID been the biggest issues in major metropolitan areas? So if you're on the right and you live in some rural area, well, you're more likely to not know someone who's gotten it than if you live in the middle of Atlanta or New York or something like that. And so I understand that. But the point is, I'm not putting a judgment either way on this. I'm just saying that you have one ideology that has one belief about the pandemic, and you have another ideology that's more likely to have another belief about the pandemic. That's the only point I'm trying to make. And so why am I, what case am I trying to make here? Well, I'm sure you understand by now. My point is that all the data points to the fact that our media intake is impacting our views of things in a way that is increasing the divide between the views we have in common. And this is on purpose on the media's part, right? But let's, like I said, peel back the layer of having your bias confirmed or just, continually having different biases confirmed. Well, that's shaping your view of reality. And what is gaslighting? It's when someone or you perceive someone as undermining or challenging what you know to be true, your view of reality. And so how can those on the left and those on the right both have equally valid claims to a perception of being gaslit? Well, the picture I drew back here is saying if you have this media echo chamber and it's giving you, depending on, so it divides us up, or we self-divide, and you have people on the left who are only getting these things that kind of shape their, their reality, and you're in this milieu of, okay, here are all the things that are become axioms. You have one view of reality. And if you're on the right, it's the same things happening there. And it's shaping your view of reality and what you know to be true, right? You know to be true. Well, so let's say I'm in my little, I'm partisan echo chamber, and I have my own things that just come out that are true, I believe to be true, because that's what happens. Like I said, you don't have to think about gravity. It just is. You just incorporate that into how you live your life. It becomes subconscious. So I have all these worldviews and beliefs about what is true that have been cultivated largely due to my media intake, right? And then now I'm exposed to you making a truth claim, or you're just saying something that is axiomatically true to you, but it is also a truth claim that's completely different than my understanding of reality. Well, what happens? I'm going to feel like I'm being gaslit. I'm going to say, what are you talking about? You're crazy. That's all in your head. That never happened, right? Like, that is fundamentally insane. So that's how that can happen. One of the interactions I had last night was with someone I respect a lot. I know they're very thoughtful about the beliefs they hold. They're not some, crazy radical in any way that I can tell. We just have different beliefs about different things. And we were having a disagreement / conversation about trying to figure out where the disconnect was in our beliefs about something. And they had written an article that I'd responded to, and they didn't really like my response. And so we were, talking and having a really good civil conversation. It was good. And at one point, I kind of had an epiphany where they were talking about how they were trying to just, the whole point of the article was they were trying to make an emotional appeal and, try to get people to understand this perspective. And I said, okay, I think I see where there's a disconnect here, because you perceive what you wrote as just an emotional appeal, right? And what I saw in there was I did see an emotional appeal, which I said, yeah, like, engaging with someone's emotions that are real is good. You need to do that, because even if you disagree with how the emotions got there, it doesn't help to just throw facts at them. You still have to acknowledge the fact that what they're feeling is real. I said, but I also saw you making truth claims. So there's an emotional appeal, but then there was also axioms, truth claims included in that. And I engage with both. I engage with the truth claims you made and the emotional appeal. I said, does that sound right? And they said, yeah, I think that's true. They said, but I don't see it as zero sum. And I also thought to the beginning of the conversation I had with this person, where they started out with, as you know, and then they made a bunch of truth claims. And I was like, well, hold on. No, I don't agree with that. It's not as I know, but assuming I did, and then I continued from there. But again, my point is that our beliefs about reality just come out, right? They just do. We just engage with the world around us based on our beliefs about reality. And how different our beliefs about reality are from those around us or those we interact with is going to lead to really, really, really different and potentially violent, or, at least uncomfortable interactions with people who have a fundamentally different view of reality. And so the more, I guess, I always suck at ending videos or drawing conclusions on stuff like this, because I'll just make an observation and I go, hey guys, check out this observation. And then I'm like, well, I don't know what to do with that. But I guess my thought is, that I wanted you to be thinking about is, and why I asked you what are the factors that contribute to your perceptions of reality, is that if you're in that, group who just gets it from an echo chamber, I think we have to be aware of the fact that we don't just have different opinions. This isn't like, yogurt versus ice cream or something, or cake versus pie, like, or charcoal versus gas grill. Like, this is just fundamental perspectives on the bedrock view of reality that we have are going to be very different than someone else's. And so people on the left can absolutely make the claim, you're gaslighting me, if they exist in this silo of, having all their biases confirmed and it's formed their perspective of reality. The minute a view that comes from the other side is entered into that, they're going to go, what are you talking about? You're gaslighting, man, because it's going to be in complete contradiction to this reality framework that they have cultivated, again, I think largely unintentionally. And the same on the right. So a person on the right will say, what are you talking about? The minute they're exposed to this other thing and say, you're gaslighting me. So Huffington Post can say you're gaslighting me and Ben Shapiro can say you're gaslighting me. And I think they can both be true. And so I think that the way that we get around this, or one of the ways we get around this, is, Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay, I've referenced this book a lot, How to Have Impossible Conversations. They talk about understanding a person's epistemology, which is just how you know what you think you know. And so what we have to do is look at their conclusion and what they're saying and not say, that's obviously wrong. That's obviously wrong. Like, I've had friends, people who I have political disagreements with, say things to me that are so fundamentally like outside the norm of what I would consider to be a valid understanding of things, that it stops me in my tracks. But I have to either go, okay, this person is so detached from reality, like such an idiot, that this doesn't dignify a response, or say, even if that is insane to me, I know this person is a reasonable person. They landed on that belief sincerely. And so I need to try and figure out how they got there. And so that's where you can get at someone's epistemology and say, okay, what you just said is effing nuts to me. And I can just say that. I can tell you you're an idiot. It was a conservative guy who was telling me what an idiot I was the other night, simply for suggesting that, it probably wasn't a great idea to just assume Donald Trump was going to win re-election in a landslide. I said there's a lot of Democrats who thought the same thing about a different candidate in 2016, and look where that got him. And he was just calling me a moron and all this other stuff. Because what I was saying was so far outside the realm of possibility for him that he just couldn't engage with it. And I see people on the right do that. I see people on the left do that. And so we could do that. We could say, well, you're a moron, and just disengage. Or you could go, okay, well, how did you get there? How did you land on that? And try to reverse engineer their thought process, determine the epistemology, and then see if there's some overlap with your perception of reality, with what you think, what you believe, what you hold to be true. And try to find some commonality there, some common ground. Boghossian and Lindsay call it building a golden bridge. And then work from there. But so, yeah, that's the main thing I would leave you with is, don't be that person who just says you're an idiot because you said something that is fundamentally crazy to me. Understand that there are things that you could say that they would have the exact same response, right? So there was another thing I saw yesterday on social media where there was someone saying something about how I'm so exhausted, I'm so done talking to this group of people, like I can't even have a conversation with them, And I was like, okay, I disagree with what you're saying. Like, I thought that it was completely ludicrous, the proposition. And I was talking to a friend about it who was on the other side of that issue. And my friend said, yeah, as someone on the other side of that who feels like I'm swimming upstream, I feel that way too. I feel exhausted also. So you have two people on two different sides of an issue who are completely exhausted with those on the other side of the issue because they feel like they're just trying to argue the existence of gravity. It's like, well, this is obviously true. So I think we have to assume that people, for the most part, land on their beliefs sincerely, even if we think their beliefs are crazy, and decide, okay, am I trying to change this person's mind? If so, then I have to put a lot of work into trying to untangle how they got there, and not just assume that the axioms I'm going to put forth are going to automatically map onto their worldview and their perspective. And if I'm not trying to change their mind, or if I don't think that's a worthy task, then I can at the very least ask them some questions to try and understand how they got there, so I can maybe change their mind next time, or move the needle in the direction for someone else. So that's my point. Is yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. That both sides have a valid claim to feeling like they're gaslit, and it leads to frustration. Like, people on the left are really frustrated and people on the right are really frustrated. I'm frustrated. Like, I notice this. I feel this in myself because there are conversations that I have with people that I'm like, I've heard this analogy. I think this was also James Lindsay talking about feeling like you're banging on a bell as hard as you can and there's no noise coming out. And I've had that feeling. I'm like, what? Why is this so hard? Like, this is obviously true. Well, over half of us live in an echo chamber, and our perception of reality is based on those inputs. And the more things become political, and the more our politics and our ideology pervades all aspects of life, like it's in sports, it's in school, it's in the corporations, it's in the media, it's in Hollywood, it's in everything. The more it pervades everything, the more we're going to siphon off and just have fundamentally different views of reality. And we can't coexist in that way. We can't coexist in that way. And so if we really are worried about, the consequences of this, of having our bias confirmed and being in our own echo chambers, like, we have to go, this isn't just about having different opinions on taxes. This is about fundamentally different opinions on reality. And, there's probably some overlap there that we're not realizing. But we have to start from the assumption that you have a different view of reality than I do. I have a different view of reality than you do. And we need to figure out, where's the overlap? How do we get there? And how can we find some commonality? Otherwise, we're screwed, man. We're totally screwed. We're totally screwed if we continue to go down this road. And I'll cover some of that whenever I talk about my DNC, RNC, and perceptions of both from either side. I'll probably make a video on that this coming week, I think. Anyway, but yeah, imagine, again, so I go back to the different examples of having fundamentally different views of reality. Like, imagine trying to, like, let's say you were on some type of committee and you were paired off with someone who, like, I'll go with the racist view, who fundamentally believed that one race was superior to all the rest of the races. And they incorporated that into everything you were supposed to do, right? Or take something else where they believed that, I don't know, some other silly belief that was absolutely crazy. Like, you could only, I can't think of an example off the top of my head. I'm really tired. My point is if they had something that was completely contradictory and incompatible with your beliefs about reality, would you be able to function on that committee with them? Like, do you think they'd feel like they could function on that committee with you? Like, of course not. Of course not. Well, in this country, we can obviously have strong disagreements about certain things and certain opinions about certain things. But if our beliefs about the very nature of reality are incompatible at every level and there's no overlap, then there's nowhere to go from there. If you have both sides of the population thinking that they're being gaslit, that the other side is intentionally trying to undermine their view of reality, there's nowhere to go from there. Bridget Fetisi just wrote an article about why she wasn't going to vote in November. And I don't agree with her on everything, but she makes a point that I've also heard Ben Shapiro make, and I've heard others make, that no matter what happens in November, one half of the country is going to think that it was illegitimate, that they were robbed or cheated in some way. No matter what. I made that point during the impeachment. I was saying one side of the country is going to think that, the election is illegitimate. And so, like, that's a view of reality that has seriously, real, freaking serious consequences, right? Like, what do if you think that the other side is now going to control your life and they got there illegitimately? What does any person do? You're going to revolt against that, man. You're going to revolt against that. So we have to start trying to find some of that commonality now, because it's going to be really bad in November if we continue down this road. I mean, this has been a theme of my channel, of my podcast for a long time. It's arguably been the main theme, which is we cannot persist in this environment of just viewing each other as enemies. We have to come together. We can't be this divided. And one of the things that's causing that division is, just living in these echo chambers and having these fundamentally different views of reality, including the view that those on the other side are evil. I mean, that has become true for people. That has become axiomatically true. And so they're just navigating their world with that as just as true as the existence of gravity and, the moon coming up at night and the sun going down at night. Like, it's just true. It's like the tides coming in and out. So that's really bad. That's really bad. So that'd be my challenge to you is, ask yourself, am I in an echo chamber? Would I know it if I was? And, start trying to expose yourself to some people you disagree with. I know I've given you these thoughts before, but, I'm maintain that this is a good thing to do. And also start trying to be intentional about how you have these interactions. And whenever someone says something that is just effing nuts to you, like, try to ask, okay, how did you get there? Don't just be that guy who calls him an idiot or calls him a dumb snowflake or calls him a dumb alt-right, ignorant, deplorable. Then say, okay, how'd you get there? Like, I want to understand how you got there. Because unless you really are a complete moron, like dumber than a box of rocks, you probably got there through some honest, analysis of things. Might be flawed, but it was probably honest. And go from there and start to try to figure out what are the axioms that I'm injecting into conversations that are not axioms for other people. So that's my point. Anyway, that's not, I know that's not any type of, earth-shattering advice, but I do think that it adds another perspective on there are real consequences to just being in these echo chambers. It's not just about having, some random, frivolous opinion validated all the time, like, cake or pie, like I said, but it's the very nature of reality is widening what two sides view about reality is fundamentally different, and we just can't exist like that. So anyway, that's it. If this is the kind of thing you're into, please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate you watching, appreciate you engaging my content. You can follow me on Twitter. That's at My Mundane Mind, or go to my locals page. That's returntoreason.locals.com. Been having some really fun conversations on there with people lately, really interesting perspectives. And so that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what Locals is all about for the content creators. It's so we can actually have a community and engage with people and have people share their ideas and thoughts and kind of kick them around. So please go and join my community over there. I haven't attached a Stripe account, which means this is all just me trying to build a community. There's no financial stuff involved in it at all right now. So anyway, go do that. Follow me on YouTube or subscribe on YouTube. That's at Return to Reason on YouTube. And then same on ThinkSpot as Return to Reason. I have articles on Medium, Return to Reason, all the different places, Spotify, so on and so forth. The thing, as Joe Biden would say. Which, speaking of Biden, like I said, I'm going to do some election stuff this coming week, I think. And I always get frustrated just talking about politics, like just politics. It drives me insane. But I think that there's a lot of stuff happening right now that's really interesting that deals with politics, but also gets to the root of things like this here. And so I'm going to be trying to do more of that, especially as we're leading up to the election, obviously. Anyway, that's it. I appreciate you watching and appreciate you sharing, subscribing, all that stuff. And I will check you later. Peace.